heard about Gagne's 9 events of instruction. Gagne is a very well-known scholar in the area of teaching and learning, and he has lots of research and publication on how to engage students and how to motivate students. What Gagne says is that as a student or a human being, we learn when 9 events happen. These 9 events have to happen, which means that when we're planning our lecture, 50 minutes, 1 hour 25, 3 hours, whatever we can, to create these 9 events. What does he say? The first event for students to learn is that you need to gain the attention of students. You're starting a class, you have specific topics in your mind, right? How are you going to gain the attention, create that interest? By maybe putting the small 1-minute video, putting the quote on, relating to something that's happening in the news, saying something controversial that you know is going to create some tension and so forth. As an example, you come into this session and I start the session by saying, guys, what I think is going to happen is in light of the 4th Industrial Revolution, in 10 years' time you will have no jobs because you're going to be replaced by robots. Are you going to like that? Do you want to be replaced by a robot? Now, a lot of people are going to say, no way, faculty and professors are always going to be needed, and they're going to give you a million reasons for that. And you gain attention. It doesn't mean that I believe that faculty are, but it's just switching the mind of students. Asking them to relate something to a real life experience. Sharing a simple quote, it doesn't have to be 10 minutes. It could be just 30-second quote that you will put them up there. A slide, a visual. The second thing, what they say is that you have to inform learning outcomes. And again, when I'm talking about learning outcomes, I'm talking about learning objectives at the level of that particular class. Sometimes we say, oh, we have to tell students about learning outcomes because NCAA says that we have to inform students, and when my reviewers are going to come and they're going to meet with the students, they're going to ask them, did your professors explain the learning outcomes? So we come and say, yes, they are in the course specification, and on the first class, we actually tell the student, go read the course specification, or we take the course and we read blah, 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 blah. Most of the students didn't understand a word of what you said. Now, informing learning outcomes means that learning outcomes are not just something you put there and then you say on the first day of the class and then you forget about them. You keep on reminding students. Every lecture, you say, today we're going to be covering, our objective is to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and this links to your second learning outcome that says this and your third learning outcome that says this. The next session you say, we're going to be covering, based on what we covered last week, we're going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, and this covers to learning outcome 4, which is, by the time the 15 weeks are over, your students know by heart their course learning outcome. If students know what they're expected to learn, they can better contribute to your particular course. So when I say inform learning outcomes, I don't mean go and read the course specific, the learning outcome in the course spec. We know that this is there. You might want to simplify it in a simple language. Students don't know about Bloom's taxonomy. Students don't know about, higher order and national qualification framework and all. They want simple language that they can understand. The third thing you have to do is, before I throw some new knowledge, let me recall prior knowledge. If the topic I'm going to cover today is based on another topic I covered last week or the week before, or a prerequisite course, before I give you that new, let me recall the information. And there are different ways depending on the time you have. You might do a small online quiz, you might do a summary yourself, you might ask questions to specific students to evaluate how much they have the prior knowledge. Our colleague have mentioned something about prior knowledge. So you might do a small diagnostic assessment, and I'll talk about diagnostic assessment in a while. So there are small things you can do. You might involve the student at the beginning in a small group activity to recall the information before you build something from it. Then you go to the 4th event, which is presenting new content. You might do it in a lecture, you might do a video and record and upload it on your learning management system for your student. You might give them a chapter to read. It's really up to you how do you want to present the new content. Then I give you the content, I contextualize the content, I give you guidelines. I talk to you about theories or for instance about finance as an example. But then I want you to think as a student studying finance, about finance in the context of education, in the context of healthcare, in the context. So I give you additional guidelines, I give you additional case study. I ask you to actually apply this in a specific setting. So I'm giving you some extra, if you want, tips on understanding the topic that I have covered. Then I give you an activity. It could be simple things like 5 minutes discussion like we did, or a more complex activity. It could be in class, it could be outside of the classroom. It could be individually, it could be done in group. But the activity allows you to apply the knowledge into a context. So it improves your retention. Now, the activities have no value if you don't give feedback to students. If you don't walk around and see how the discussion is going on and you give feedback. If you find a group who's going out of the subject and you actually did not guide them, there is no value. If you don't summarize the outcome or you don't give your view of point, then there is no value. Activities in class are nice because they allow you, to understand your students, to see, it gives you, as our colleague has said before, it gives you information and data about how students are learning, what they're learning. Is there a group where somebody is dominating the discussion and the others are just sitting like this? You're a professor, you're walking around, you're seeing what's happening. So feedback is important. You find out that the group dynamics were not where, you find out that the understanding of the group is completely wrong. So you provide feedback. This will prepare them for the assessment. If this is not done well, the assessment, the preparation for the assessment will not be done. You assess, you grade, and then you prepare the students so that they are capable of transferring what you have taught them to the next level, whether it's within your course or within another course. And this is what we call Gagne's 9 elements of instruction. Gagne says that this could be a very useful framework if you're doing a lecture plan, if you're having a small plan worksheet or in your head even. Make sure that these elements are there in every lecture that you have. It's a good starting point. Now, the problem when you talk about active learning, people will come and say, where do I start from? And I do realize that in many cases, you are not probably the person who wrote your course specification document. I know this. I work with lots of universities in the kingdom, and I know that very often what happens, the professor gets a course spec, and they have to stick to it. But let me tell you something. Course specifications are not Quran. They're not the Bible. They're things that have to be changed and improved. In fact, from a quality perspective, if I go to a university and they say, for 5 years we haven't changed this course, I question the quality system of the institution. If you're teaching a course on social media, and 5 years you haven't changed it, your course is probably obsolete. So the issue of reviving and changing the courses to basically, integrate quality is an important element. Now, it means that when you're thinking about active learning and using technology, you don't think of it once your course specification is done and finalized. You have to think of it at the time when you are designing your course. When you're thinking about your course learning outcome, you're thinking about your assessment, this is when you think about active learning and technology integration. It's not on the top after you have done the course, because then you're going to have some issues. You're stuck with a course that you cannot do anything with. So what is the starting point to actually integrate active learning and technology? It's at the time when you design your course. Now there is a concept called integrated course design. When you design a course, and I think some of my colleagues, some of you might have attended with my colleague James' course design session, right? Right? So in course design, when you're designing a course, you always think about 4 things. The first thing, who are my students? And I know that you don't know individually who are your students, but you have some trend, you have some data. You know that the majority of your students are working students, non-working students, Saudis, non-Saudis, women, men, adult students, or young 17, 18-year students, and they're going to be learning online, or they're going to be learning on class, whatever. So you have some kind of background. You need to know who are your students, so that you can actually design a course that fits also what they need. Not just the international standards and all, but also that answers their requirements. Because remember, you're student-centric. The second thing you have to think of is, what do you want the students to learn by the end of your course? What do you want them to learn? What do you want them to know? And that is usually what you call your learning outcomes. And I'll come back to the learning outcomes in a bit. The third thing is to ask yourself, well, I know what I want them to learn, but how would I know when I finish my course that my students have learned what I wanted them to learn? And that is your assessment. And then only you will start and think about what can I do during the 15 weeks in terms of content and learning activities and assignments and all of this to prepare the students for the assessment and to ensure eventually that they have achieved the learning outcome. This is the concept of backward design. It's called backward design. Why? Because you start by the end. You start by first thinking about what you want the students to be able to do, how you're going to evaluate it, then what are you going to be doing to help the student achieve the outcome and perform well in their assessment. And that is the concept of backward design, which is different from the old traditional design approach, where people used to think first about what textbook I'm going to be using, what's the content, and then they will think about the learning outcome ending. Now it's thinking the other way around. You might not even have a textbook. You might have multiple reading materials in some courses, especially advanced level courses. Now, the problem is what? Is that often what happens, we design the course, we put the teaching and learning strategies, we put the assessment, and then we come and say, yeah, but we have Blackboard and we have an LMS. What can we do with it? Yeah, already this is prescribed in the teaching and learning, so it says I have to, all I will do, I will upload my PowerPoint slides, and I will ask my student to upload their assignment, and I'm perfect with technology. Technology is a mean to an end, it's a tool. It's about the pedagogy. Don't use technology just for the sake of using it. Use technology if it's going to help you do what you're supposed to do in a better way. Whether it's in terms of efficiency, flexibility, or creating more excitement for your students, because students do like technology. They love technology, they know how to use it for playing and all, but they don't know how to use it for learning very often. It becomes a different thing. Now, why did I come to the point of course design? Because you think about active learning when you're thinking about your teaching and learning strategies. When you're thinking about assessment. If you're building assessment for active learning, it's different than if you're building assessment for a normal thing. Because then it means your formula changes. You will be focusing more on formative assessment and feedback and less on summative assessments. And this is why I came back to the point of course design. If your course is poorly designed, everything you will be doing is going to be poor. And this is why it's unfortunate sometimes that you see some institutions, in 4 hours they cook a course specification document. They call the dean, calls the head of department calls the professor. They say, okay, by today, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I want the course specification for this course. A course specification is like a manual, it's your roadmap. It tells you, it stipulates everything you're going to be doing. So if it's poorly designed, you end up with a course, no matter how well you have to adhere to this course. And this is why we say a course that is poorly designed is like a poorly written instructional manual to mount a chair. If it's not properly, if it's not clear, you might end up with a chair mounted upside down. Why? Because you are following the manual, and the manual was poorly written. So the chair, instead of sitting on it, you're going to end up with a chair like this. It's the same thing for course design. Are we clear? Yeah? Now, that means that when we have course specifications, what we have to look at is really these 4 components: students, learning outcomes, assessment, and then content and teaching and learning. Content and teaching comes at the end. The problem, what happens is that in many places, people might think this in this order. But what happens is that the components are not linked together. So you read the learning outcome. The learning outcomes say by the end of the course, the students will be able to critically analyze these different theories. The students will be able to apply the principles of blah, blah, blah in this context. The students will be able to contrast and compare blah, blah, blah. Then you go to the assessment strategy, and all the assessment is true, false, and multiple choice, and fill in the blanks. How are you going to evaluate critical thinking skills with true, false, and fill in the blanks? You teach a course on project management, and then the final assessment is an exam. Well, at the end of the day, it's not about the theory, it's about the application. So the problem that happens is very often that the learning outcomes are developed, then people think about the content, then people think about the assessment, and we don't see the links between them. You go in this matrix, you know the matrix that you have to fill in the course specification, where you have to align the learning outcomes with the assessment technique, and people just go like this, tick, 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 tick. And funny enough, one thing I very frequently see is that you have a midterm exam, and then they put the midterm exam is mapped into all the learning outcomes of the course. Well, if you have achieved all the learning outcomes by the time of the midterm, then خلاص, finish the course. Why do you want to finish it? Complete it. You know? You align, the project, the group project is linked to CLO3, CLO5, CLO7. Wow, that's great. But you know what? There is not a single information about what the project is all about. So basically, this alignment process has to be thought of. If you are going to design a course, or you're going to be reviewing the design of your course, or proposing to your department or your college to change a course specification document, you need to ensure that these three elements are all working together. This is what we call constructive alignment. Constructive alignment means that you're aligning your learning outcome with your assessment strategies, with your teaching and learning strategies. So if you had a learning outcome that say by the end of the course the students will be able to critically analyze this and this, it might be that there are some teaching strategies that should focus on the student critical thinking skills. You don't do exams and midterm and teaching through lecturing only and come and say I'm building critical thinking skills. If you have one of your learning outcomes is to improve communication skills or collaborative skills in whatever domain and field and whatever it is, then it means that this should be reflected in your teaching strategies and in your assessment methods. It's not something that's going to come on its own. It's something that you have to enforce. And this is why when I say learning outcomes or course design are at the beginning of what you would think of when you want to implement student centricity and active learning. You don't design the course and then think, how am I going to make my course active? It's at the time where you're designing it. It's at the time even when you're articulating your learning outcome. Now, obviously, I'm sure you all know what a learning outcome is. A learning outcome is simply a measurable statement of what you want the student to know, be able to do, or value, right? And this is why we say there are usually three types of learning outcomes. There are knowledge learning outcomes, there are skills learning outcomes, and there are attitudes, values learning outcomes, which are the most difficult ones to evaluate and to assess. Now, learning outcomes are the most important bit in your course design. Because no matter what you do, what matters at the end is to which extent your students have achieved their learning outcome. So for instance, it's like a surgeon going and talking, well, congratulations, it was a very good surgery and blah, blah, and it was very, and then at the end, the result is what? The patient died. Doesn't matter how well the surgery was, the outcome is that the patient has died. This is the same thing with the learning outcomes. It doesn't matter what fantastic PowerPoints you have prepared and assessments you have designed. At the end of the day, what matters is the degree and the extent to which your students have achieved their learning outcomes.